Good morning. It is Friday, January 24th. This is Senate Agriculture. We're going to start off this morning talking with a young lady that I've known for a long time. Never met, I don't believe.
No, just
met
run
her
around
husband,
in the same circles.
we've had a lot of conversations. We got Tracy Zhao, the president of the Vermont Land Trust, and welcome. How are you?
Thank you. I'm well.
Good. The floor is yours. Tell us what you'd like.
Great. I can share my screen. I have a slide deck that guide the conversation, but really want this to be in service to the kinds of questions you might have for us. Really just an introduction to Vermont Land Trust and what we do in particular with farms around the state. So that works. I will share my screen. Sorry, looking for
good slideshow.
I know it's there's like all these things up that are blocking me. Here we go. All right, great. So again, I'm Tracy Zhao, and I'm the president and CEO of Vermont Land Trust. I've been in that role for about 1.5 years, but I'm not new to Vermont Land Trust. I've actually been with the organization 27 years. Started out my career running the roads of the Northeast Kingdom, working with farmers, forest landowners, and communities on conservation, and moved into more statewide leadership roles about a little over 10 years ago. Focused on first our conservation work and then also our easement stewardship work. And then now I've been serving as president. And really, it's the honor of my life to be in that role because I really believe passionately in the work we do. We've been working since 1977, really firmly embedded in the concept of helping people to protect and care for and connect to the home we share in Vermont, particularly our landscape. To date, we're approaching our 50th anniversary as an organization, and over that time, we've conserved 11% of the state as an organization. So there's more conserved land in the state than that, and if the map on the side there is all the conserved lands in Vermont. So the orange is federal land, Green Mountain National Forest, Conti, and then the light green is state ownerships, and then the dark green is lands that Vermont Land Trust has protected through conservation easement. Some of the state land also has conservation easements on it that we hold because we do help the state on occasion acquire land. And of that, 647,000 acres, over 1,000 farms. We passed 1,000 farms a couple years ago. Now we're over 1,100 and about 450,000 acres of forest land. To do that, we steward, which means we monitor and enforce conservation easements on 2,300 individual parcels around the state. It's one of the largest easement portfolios in the nation, in one of the smallest states. So we've been really successful in Vermont, and that's due to landowners wanting to work with us, being really committed to their land, and also, I will say, the state's commitment to land conservation through the Vermont Highway Conservation Board, as well as federal funds for conservation, have been really instrumental in being able to conserve this much land. We also own land. Right now we have 44 properties. That number fluctuates because a chunk of that 44 are lands that we never intend to hold very long. We play an instrumental role, in particular in the farming community, of being an interim owner to help bridge the time from an outgoing farmer to a new incoming operation. And that's something that we've been leaning into and doing more of over the past 20 years because there are just instances where the real estate market is moving at a pace that a new and beginning farmer cannot move at. And we can play a role to bridge that. It used to be we would hold the property long enough just to get the funds for a conservation easement, buy down the value of the land, allow the incoming farmer to buy the farm more affordably. But what we discovered and started to do about 5 years ago was that was not supportive of every farm operation, that a lot of new and beginning farmers need more time. They need a longer on-ramp to be successful. And the ultimate goal is to have a farmer with a successful business on the land, because that's why we conserve the land, is so that it's available for productive uses. And so now we own farms for as long as 5 years in order to take some of the pressures off those incoming farmers. And at any one time, we're owning 10 to 15 farms, and some are going out of our ownership, some are coming into our ownership, and it's sort of a cycle. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. We have 47 staff. We're spread out all over the state. We have 5 offices, but for decades before COVID, we had people working from home because they're in the corners of the state where we didn't have an office. But we've always believed that having people embedded in the communities that we're serving really benefits our work, because folks know us, they trust us, and we understand the priorities and can work with communities on what is important, because regionally there's real differences around our state, even as small as it is. And we have an operating budget of over $7 million.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Hey, Tracy, I'm just wondering, that budget includes the funding for purchase of the properties, or
No, that's outside. That's outside. We don't run our conservation easement purchase dollars through our operating budget. That's strictly our operating budget. It does include the lands we own and the costs associated with owning and managing the lands we own, but the easement activities, the pass-through dollars is not in that budget. That is many more millions a year in easement dollars that flow through the organization very briefly from funding sources like VHCB, USDA, NRCS, and then quite a bit of philanthropy, private foundations, and in some cases, private donors who are contributing to easement purchases. We also do, about a quarter of our conservation portfolio in a year is through donation. So landowners who donate conservation easements. So that value is not even captured in the easement dollars, but is also a significant amount of value.
So just 2 other things, if I could. Is the FY26 budget available to you yet? The governor's gonna tell all of us on Tuesday. Is it what's in the budget coming up?
So for us, our operating budget does rely on support from funders with easement activity like the Vermont Housing Conservation Board. We have a portfolio that is years in development so we have a demand, and I'll have a slide in a few slides. We have a demand that far outstrips the annual allocation that might come through VHCB, through USDA. And it takes years for landowners to make it through our conservation process. 2 to 3 years is not uncommon anymore, just because of all the steps. So yes, we rely on meeting that demand and working with those landowners to have a sustained amount of funding through VHCB. And, they, by statute, 50% of the property transfer tax is to be allocated to the Housing and Conservation Trust Fund, which I think is like $30 million this year. So we rely on that. We also know that every year the legislature and the governor get to work on how to balance all the needs. So I think the Vermont Housing Conservation Coalition will be back in the State House on the 14th of February, bringing landowners who have benefited from the funds to kind of make the case for why this kind of investment by the state is important. I'll say one more thing on this slide, and then we'll move. When we were founded in 1977, our founding president, Rick Carbon, he and the founding board really had a vision of a 3-legged stool for what makes communities vibrant and livable, which was land conservation, protecting the working landscape, important community spaces, affordable housing, and economic development. And I think, that vision really flowed into the creation of the Vermont Housing Conservation Board, 15 years later or so. And it's something that we believe in really strongly at Vermont Land Trust, that our work in balance, in concert with work on housing and work on economic development, and in our case in particular, economic development that focuses on using our working landscape and supporting businesses is really sort of the ultimate vision.
Thank you.
So again, how we help folks protect land, care for it, and connect to it is a variety of activities. Conservation easements are a big part of our work. With every conservation easement comes the perpetual obligation to steward those conservation easements. So it's a growing part of our staff are stewarding, connecting with landowners, these conservation restrictions, land ownership that I talked about. We're also, really focused on activating that conserved landscape. So we've reserved 11% of the state from development. Let's make sure that land actually is living up to its full potential. That relies on the landowners, but there's ways to assist those landowners, for example, by creating incentives and also education around restoration, land management, soil health, all things, and especially right now, looking at sort of the impacts of climate change, flood resiliency, water quality are all really important and things that we are actively working on across our lands. And then also access to land. In this slide has farmland access, but we also think about recreational access. We also think about new and different types of landowners who have historically not had access to land. How can our work help them? And then lastly, really connecting people to our working landscape through events, storytelling, and education. So folks who may never own land, how could they benefit from the work we do is sort of what we think about.
Are all easements the same?
No, we have a conservation easement that's particularly tailored to farm ownership, that's really focused on what does it take to be a productive farm and how to build the flexibility around farm buildings, farm housing, and also other types of activities on the land. We also have easements that are more tailored towards forest ownership. They all, and this is a lot of learning on our part, are as flexible as possible around changing land, because land is coming out of agriculture, old pasture is growing up. At the same time, some land is being reclaimed, and allowing for that balance that's done well is something that we build into conservation easements because they are perpetual. So trying to build in as much of the uncertainty while protecting that sort of underlying soil resource.
You do carve outs for people who want to get into the program and say, well, listen, I'd really like to do this, but this is my pet peeve about this piece of land. This is what I'd like to see, or you don't do it that way.
Yeah, no, we do. So every conservation easement is individually tailored to that particular property. So we have an easement template, and then we sort of tailor it to that property, meaning what land is in, what land is out. So it is very common for a landowner to leave some land out of the conservation agreement. Now, depending on what land they want to leave out, could make them ineligible for certain funding sources or not competitive. So we sort of do that back and forth, but also firmly believe that we need to leave room for housing. We need to think about families and how they are taking care of their kids, passing land down. So yeah, every one of them is sort of individually tailored, and it's very common to have some land not included.
And what would you say to the folks? Because I think, there's a lot of people that don't understand what you do. What would you say to folks that say, oh, once you put an easement on it, you can't ever do anything with it?
You can't do some things, that's for sure. And a lot, I said it takes 2 to 3 years to get through the conservation program. Part of that is we actually because it gives people a lot of time to fully understand what they're getting into and make sure it's a really good fit for them, for their family, for their business, because it's not for everyone. And you are restricting subdivision, residential development, commercial development that's not related to agriculture or forestry. And so there are things you won't be able to do. And you want to make sure that that fits with your vision, and things like what land to leave out, how to think about how to use the proceeds, tax implications, family, dynamics. That's a big one. Especially in the farm world, we're often working with, multi-generational situation and thinking about that. And once you've done it, you have done it. Unlike the current use program where you can opt out, you can pay a penalty, you cannot get out of a conservation easement. It is a legal binding, it binds itself to the land, and it is recorded in the land records, and it runs with the land is the legal terminology. I don't know how legal that is, but how legalese that is. Meaning that when that land is bought and sold, the land can be bought and sold, it's privately owned, but those restrictions remain in place and bind the next owner. A lot of our work is thinking about how to educate that next generation of owners. And we've now seen, properties because of the long tenure, 2, 3, 4 owners. And the first owner chose to do it, maybe got either a big tax deduction or got a big check that they were able to then put back into the land in some way. The next owner is not necessarily having that experience. And so making sure that they understand the restrictions, and also it's partly why we are very focused on how do we benefit that next generation, thinking about incentives we can do, education, resources. How can we, be a resource to the conserved landowners going forward is really important. So that land stays vibrant.
And how do you affect, how do you see that the easements affect land values, if at all?
Yeah, it's a great question. The whole reason we can buy a conservation and pay a landowner for the development rights, as they're often called, is because appraisals will show a difference in value. So, and that's how we pay folks, is based on appraisal. So there's an appraisal of what the land would sell for based on comparable sales of similar properties in the region as recently as possible. And then a second appraisal as if the restrictions were in place based on how we've crafted them, what lands in, what lands out, what would it sell for under those restrictions, which is less. And it is why it's a great tool for passing land on in the farm community, because it's making farms more affordable. Now, there is so much pressure on land and so much pressure on land values, and we're seeing it both at the unconserved and the conserved lands. And the pressures on the conserved values are different, right, than the unconserved values. Unconserved values is, development pressure. Conserved is farms competing with each other for land, farm consolidation, folks coming from outside the state where their land values were higher, maybe selling a farm in another state, can afford to pay more in our state. So we're pushing at that affordability question a lot of different ways, and I can talk about that more in some of the examples.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we took testimony this week and the week before probably about dairy farms. And
Yeah.
I'm a big lover of dairy farms. And we're down to about 440, give or take. So of the 7 families that you helped last year, was that field crops or maple, or was there any sort of a new dairy farm springing?
There are several dairy farms in that 7.
That's great.
There's one right on the cover of the annual report, and actually it's the same picture here on the slide, which is Lucas Dairy Farm, John Lucas. Now, he had been renting this farm, the Audette farm, Mike and Tom Audette, longtime owners of that farm, very involved in the farming community. John Lucas had been on some other farms for years and landed here. We actually helped make the connection. Tom and Mike had been looking for the next farmer for their property, which is really tremendous. A lot of, really nice ag land, but also really sensitive land close to the lake, on the lake. Over a course of years, John worked with the Audettes to sell a conservation easement and buy the farm just this past year. So Lucas Dairy is in this acreage of farmland we've conserved this year, and one of the 7 families. I have another example, the DeFriest farm in Waitsfield and Warren. We also helped Dave DeFriest, sort of the new generation on that dairy farm, acquire a parcel, and we threw everything at that in terms of all the different tools we have to sort of help, and we also bridge owned that as well. So of the 7, I'd say at least 3 were dairy farms.
That's great.
Yeah.
Is in Addison County, I think?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good people, great people.
Marie.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yep, no, go ahead.
This slide just talks about what we did this past year, of the 8,700 acres we protected, about 2,400 acres of farmland, 6,300 acres of forest land. And again, as we conserve land, we're also thinking about how to protect the sensitive areas of properties, river buffers, wetlands, also actively restoring land by planting trees and shrubs. So not just restricting river buffers from ag, but actually actively getting them into trees so that they start acting and protecting water quality faster. So that's been something that has been real learning over the years of conservation. We're also going back to land we conserved 20, 30 years ago and adding restrictions with willing landowners. But it's a way to actually pay that next generation of owner to further restrict the land in ways we didn't. 20 years ago, I've been freelance a long time, we didn't even think about buffers. There was no conversation about it. We didn't think about putting extra restrictions on wetlands. It just wasn't part of the program, and now it very much is. We're just applying the learning, and we're able to go back to those lands, and where there's a willing landowner, add restrictions, and there's actually quite a bit of willing landowners. Farmers are seeing that letting the river move where it needs to move, it's gonna move anyway. Being paid to allow the river to move, to add buffers is something that farmers have also learned over time. And I've watched that learning happen, and some of it's been painful learning, but we're trying to apply it. So again, farmland access, we've conserved over 1,000 farms. We've facilitated over 100 successful transfers of farms through our work. Actually, this is Heartwood Farm in Albany. Andy Payanessa and his partner, Marina Carlton, they had been leasing this farm from the prior owners, the Whitcombs, who had owned it for a long time. And they were able to purchase it by selling a conservation easement and also leased part of their land to Sweet Rowan Farm, Paul Lusai. We talked about this a little bit already, but the farm landscape, you guys are getting testimony. I know about all these aspects of the pressures on farmland values, dairy sector. We're seeing farms getting bigger and getting smaller, right? We're seeing the consolidation in the dairy industry, very economically driven. We're also seeing farms get smaller as new and interesting value-added farms and operations are being developed. And we're trying to support both and being mindful of those shifts over time and how we conserve land so that it supports and can plug into really where the farm economy goes, but also really caring a lot about the farm economy, because we need that landscape to be used for it to have been worth protecting from development. So very much what we're thinking about as we work with farmers and with our partners. We've talked about the climate change impacts. This is Blue Ledge Farm in Leicester, Hannah Sessions and Greg Bernhardt. Their farm, 50 acres of wetlands that were protected as part of the farm, credited. You can Google it, with really protecting the town of Middlebury during Tropical Storm Irene. We've seen several of the conserved wetlands that we've been connected with really play that really important role of a sink for floodwaters. And that's something that the whole conservation community is thinking about a lot right now, is what are those critical floodplains, wetland areas that we can make available to water, because the water is going to keep coming, and it's coming really differently than it used to. So that's a really sort of growing focus.
Yes.
So in essence, so I understand.
Yeah.
Basically a natural mitigation to flooding is what we're trying to figure out.
Yeah. There's been so the Department of Environmental Conservation has had a river corridor program for a bunch of years that is focused on, and it pays landowners more money to include in their restrictions, like sort of letting go of fighting the river. So sort of saying the river can move and it's usually there's bounds to it because we want to protect infrastructure and things like that. But allow the river to move, allow the floodplain to be connected to the river so that water can go where it needs to go. And more farmers are signing up for that, again, because they're finding through their own experience that the river's going to go where it wants to go anyway. Fighting it can be a losing battle. If we can use our natural lands to let the rivers move where it can be safe to do it, then they hopefully are not moving where it's not safe to do it. And that's going to be just a big part of our conversation in coming years, is how to protect our built environment and how to use our lands to do that.
And I'm sorry. And so it's said that if agreeable to the landowner, you can put more restrictions on.
Yeah.
If they sell that land, those restrictions, once it's done, it's done. Even the restrictions that you've added.
Yep. So these are big deals.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So more than 100 transfers, a lot of demand. We've got, we're seeing farms selling, and 80 conserved farms sold in the last 5 years. We have a list of over 840 farm seekers. So folks looking to get into agriculture, get into their first farm. And we were talking about sort of the sustainability of funding over time. You know, we have this big pipeline that is really reliant on consistent funding support. And I mentioned that we own, yeah, go ahead.
The breakdown of the 840, it's obviously not all dairy.
No.
What is is it growers?
Yeah, vegetable growers, diversified farms, small diversified organic farms, meat, and then dairy. Yeah, it's pretty broad range of farms because again, sort of that both farms getting bigger, dairies adding land, and also small farms utilizing smaller resources. One thing I didn't talk about yet, but I talked about the fact that we own farms. To bridge them is that over the past 5 years, we developed about $15 million in debt capital that enables us to revolve those funds, to buy a farm, to hold it sometimes as long as 5 years, and then sell it at that lower value to the incoming farmer. And we usually do like a lease purchase agreement at the start that's focused on relieving some of the pressures on that farm business.
Yes.
And what happens if it falls through? The land just stays in the land trust?
Yeah, until we find it, and then we work with the new owner.
Does it always usually get sold, or at some point the land trust is just gonna own X amount of acres?
You know, we are careful what farms we purchase. We think about their agricultural viability, the ability to support a good farm operation, and a farm that if the farmer that we're working with at the outset isn't successful, somebody else is going to want to farm there. We are thoughtful about that. We also think about what kind of investments we can make during our ownership that might make the land more vital. Some of the water quality restoration work we do during our ownership, we can use grant funds to do that.
But it is possible that
it is
the land
totally.
trust is just gonna own the land for as long as the land trust is around.
Yeah, I mean, and of those 44 farms or properties we own, we do have properties that we had committed to owning for the long term. So a Bluffside Farm in Newport, which Senator Ingalls is probably familiar with.
Walk on it all the time.
Oh, awesome. Me too. I love
Yeah.
that place. We have several properties that we have committed to for long term. Some we own, some lands were given to us, and yeah, we're not sure someone else will want to own them. So we are owning them, and we think about how to use them for piloting different kinds of restoration and stewardship activities, using them for education, thinking about whether there's a municipal or public owner that might be interested in them. But yeah, we take risk. I mean, that's the point. We take risk when we purchase
And then
these
when
farms.
the land trust owns them, do they put any stipulations from the public being able to hike it, hunt it, trap it?
Yeah, when we own, the lands we own are all open to all types of outdoor recreation, including legal hunting and trapping. Most of the farms we can serve do not include public access provisions. Partly that's because these are businesses, working businesses, and that mix between open and woodland. If there's a trail that's been used or a landowner is particularly amenable to it, we will include public access, but it's not a bottom line. Our forest conservation work often includes public access provisions. And then not part of this presentation today, but our work with municipalities to create new town forests are very focused on public access and does include hunting and trapping as
And then
something the town can allow.
Being a nonprofit, you don't end up paying any taxes on the property?
We pay property taxes on every property we own. We enroll them in current use because we actively manage them, but we do pay property taxes.
Happy to hear them.
The value of the properties, have we found they go up, go down, stay the same?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, we are seeing the value of conserved land also ticking up. Again, it's a lot of it is competition for farmland. There is a lot of competition, even with the pressures on the farming community. Some of that's established businesses that have the capital to acquire more land and need to as they're getting larger than the dairy industry. And then some are, you know, value-added operations that have been successful looking to invest in more land.
As far as the use of the land that's gonna be farmed, would it be typical at all that you just say, well, that needs to stay grass and that can be corn, or is it the flexibility as long as you're following best practices and buffer zones and everything that it would be, responsible as far as, to keep runoff from happening and to follow the rules and laws and best practices? Are there
Yeah,
many?
our easements do not restrict what type of agriculture can happen outside of buffer zones, wetland areas. Those have higher levels of restriction, but really, and the same with our forest land, really believe that the individual private owner who is making decisions that best serve their operation are where those should be and can change over time. And yeah, following legal farming. So like the REPs came into play. So those now affect conserved farms. We have buffers too in our easements, but those sorts of restrictions are the kinds of things that guide how farmers make decisions.
As far as the land value, being in real estate, I can tell you that Tracy's absolutely positively correct as far as anything to do with farming. There's enough competition. As we're hearing over and over, the farms are dwindling because the land's still in production. And so you're going to see competition for good farmland and stuff. And I'm actually getting investors that are looking at forest lands that have been properly managed and saying, hey, it's all about return on investment, right? It doesn't matter what you invest in as long as you can manage it in such a way to stay in compliance, but also a way to cover your investment. I've seen it both ways, but I can say that it's trending now towards these properties having fair market value, if not even above that.
Yeah, okay, good point.
Well, I spoke to one of your colleagues, we had to sit down, and one thing maybe you're gonna mention is that if you come in and some of the land is developable, and that you will actually say, hey, let's hold this out of your, and that I didn't realize and appreciate, because oftentimes, like, we go down through Charlotte and that, a lot of that land ended up, and it's like, to me, it takes away from our future generation. One, the land will be open, it's nice, but we don't know where it's going, and at some point that land might have to be used, and it's, so I got a bittersweet about, all the land you're saving, but at the same time, future generations that might have wanted to do something else, all of a sudden they can't from some, our generation now, 100 years from now, we need to do it, but legally binding, you can't.
Yeah, and that's where I started saying that, we see our work in balance with economic development and housing development because we need all of it to have a vibrant community. And so we are really mindful of what we protect, especially when we get close to villages and towns, and where there's existing infrastructure, we will not conserve land. And it's saying that we work with landowners to what they want to leave out. But we also sometimes deliver unhappy news to landowners when we say, this is actually served by town water and sewer. We are not going to conserve it, even though you want to. We do talk to select boards. We do look at planning and zoning and think about that. And it's true, these are permanent restrictions. They do have an impact. Development also has an impact. Once a farm field is gone, it's gone. And so if we want to be able to feed ourselves, if we want to be able to get out on the land, conservation serves values for the long term as well. But I totally agree with you, and our organization feels really strongly that doing that in balance is really critical. So this farm, this was one I was talking about. This is the DeFries Farm, conventional dairy in Warren. Next generation of the farm, Dave DeFries, graduated from high school, Harwood Union, went to college, got an economics degree, was working in finance, and left and came back to the family farm, and has been really looking at modernizing his family's operation to make it sustainable. And this is a property that we did purchase for a hold. And we were talking about how long it can take to conserve land. Dave got married and had 2 children between the time that Vermont Land Trust started working with him and the closing on the sale of the farm. So we're in this for sometimes the long term. Part of it was putting together all these different funding sources because we did both farmland conservation, wetland and riparian buffer protection, and also a public access easement. So this is one where there's a farm easement to Mad River Path to connect the recreation path that's been growing and building in the Mad River Valley. and a lot of different funding sources coming together. And basically all of this happened at the same time that then we transferred the farm to Dave. And that's typically how we do it. We kind of transfer all the rights and the land ownership at the same time. Just some other examples in the time we have left. This is an example of more of a diversified farm. In this case, Vermont Land Trust didn't need to purchase this farm. The King Family Trust was in the state. They were able and willing to wait out the conservation process, but we helped match them with a farm buyer, which is the Doyle family. They had been operating on their farm is called Boneyard Farm because they've been operating on a really bony piece of land they've been renting in Bakersfield. And they kept the name, but they're on much better land now in Fletcher. And last slide is, we've touched on some of this, but we are really thinking about our work in the context of climate resilience. And, you saw the stats, we do a lot of forest land conservation. One quick plug, a quarter of the forest land protection our organization has been done through farmland protection work. So farmers in Vermont own a lot of forest land, and so they contribute to our forest protection goals. And we really think about how to hold water higher in the watershed, forests absorbing water, also carbon, and the importance of that in these times. Also, again, looking back at our conserved lands portfolio to do what we call overlays, additional protections and wetland and ecological restoration work. Didn't touch on it, but we also have a really interesting project that is federally funded. We're doing with UVM extension on soil health, sort of looking at incentives. We have a group of farmers from around the state who are changing their practices to more regenerative pasture-based agriculture. They're getting an incentive payment to kind of bridge the cost of that change. And then UVM extension is doing really detailed studies of changes in soil health to look at, what's the benefit to soil health over time against that cost. And then again, also working with landowners to connect them to education.
Does Vermont Land Trust have a mission statement or goal as far as to what the percentage of conserved land in Vermont should be versus private land ownership?
That's a great question. No, we have never set a metric because we feel like we're going to get told what it is. And to date, the demand for our work is, as strong as ever. I'd say we've changed what our priorities are as we think again about sort of, large blocks of connected forest land, their importance for climate resilience, and then, how we conserve farms, and then where we don't conserve. That has changed over time, and we're a lot more mindful of that.
Yes.
The 30 by 30 and the 50 by 50, does your land, the land trust land, fall under that category? I can't remember the answer, so that's
good question. Yes. So the inventory phase of 30 by 30 wrapped up this summer. Found 27% of the state is protected. So 11% of that is lands that Vermont Land Trust is associated with. 3% of that 27 is agricultural land. So it's represented in that. The bill it calls out agriculture and then is a little confusing about how it counts agriculture. We've really pushed that. Our agricultural landowners, again, because they also include forest land, should be included in the inventory.
Because you can't develop on it, it's conserved.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's a matrix of, river, buffers, wetlands, forest, and agriculture in one property. So one property we've conserved can be contributing to multiple categories within that inventory because of the different types of lands and protections.
What else? We got 3 minutes. What would you want to tell us?
I mean, I think any other questions that you have for us, want to be a resource, as the session goes forward. So please keep us posted.
We've been talking about the positive part of it.
Mm-hmm.
After a farmer's gotten into a trust, has it been buyer's remorse, so to speak?
Yeah, and yes, and that can be for multiple reasons. Vermont Land Trust, when I first started working for Vermont Land Trust 27 years ago, we had college interns doing our easement stewardship. It was a much smaller portfolio then, but so every year was a different person, getting to know the landowners. Not long after that, we transitioned to full-time staff who are year to year getting to know our landowners, professionals in the easement stewardship because it takes relationship building, creativity. A lot of what we do is talking to landowners, hearing what they want to do, and working with them to find a way to say yes that's within the bounds of the conservation easement. And it isn't always the big yes they want, but we work really hard, and it's a growing part of our work. And the land trust community is really grappling with like the true cost of easement stewardship. And we actually have a campaign to add to our easement stewardship endowments, because we recognize the cost to do that well and to really be not just a conservation cop, but really in service to landowners so that they can be successful. So yeah, like they can't do everything they want to do. Not everybody's happy, but we try really hard to find ways to work with them.
So quick story, my in-laws, were struggling, so they went to the land trust. Tried to convince them to go another route, something that they didn't have the rights to lands and that, so they'd still own it. So this was a bad instance. Ended up working out because the money they got, you can't turn around and pay your bills with it because then you pay capital gains on it. So luckily they went and bought another 100 acres.
Yeah, yep, that's a great strategy.
Luckily they did, because the farm only lasted another 5 years. And rather than trying to sell to a larger farm, it folded and they got consumed, and then a equestrian place bought it and tore it all down, and now it's all open meadows, just what the land trust is looking to do. So for me, it was bittersweet because they had potential of keeping the farm going, but his short-sightedness, and that's, people that are not good at business that's what happens. But luckily they had that little bit of longer time to enjoy what they did, and then the land, and it's all clay anyway, so it wasn't like it was going to get very well developed, but so I'm bittersweet about land trust.
Well, it seems as if the length of time that you're actually closing on something, there is plenty of time to go, okay, this may not be the best option for me.
I mean, it doesn't serve us to convince someone to conserve their land, because we are going to be living with them forever. And so, having unhappy folks or folks with regret, like we try to avoid that where we can. We can't always, but yeah, I mean, we throw a lot at landowners when we're talking with them about, like, really think about what this means, play out every possibility. Let's talk about what could happen and what couldn't, so that you're sure you want to do this. Now, does everybody foresee everything? No, but we've a lot of learning on our part over the years around that.
Well, good.
Thank you.
Well, we want to thank you for coming
Thanks,
in.
Tracy.
Nice overview, and we appreciate it, and we might have to have you back sometime.
We'd be happy to come back. Let us know. Thank you so much. Take care. Enjoy.
Thanks for your time.
We're gonna switch gears. We're gonna talk with the Cannabis Control Board. We have James Pepper. I'm sorry, we're new. I don't know everybody probably that Brian knows, so welcome.
Thank you. And it's all right, I've got my two other board members
Yeah,
here.
absolutely. If you want, whatever you'd like to do, however, the floor is yours,
Share.
as we say. You get the big wish here.
Or so just rearrange your community.
That's you own the place, so you do what you need.
Well, for the record, I'm James Pepper, and I'm joined by my two board members.
I'm Kyle Harris.
Julie Hubbard.
And-
Thank you for coming.
Oh,
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. So I did an introduction very similar to this yesterday in GovOps, House GovOps, and I had a PowerPoint. It was kind of dry and not very kind of interactive. I'm wondering if instead I could just kind of give you some kind of a more conversational
This is your time. You
presentation.
do with whatever you'd like to present.
Great. All right. So let me start just kind of with.
A couple of board members looking for samples. I didn't know if you didn't know.
Oh yeah, of course. I always carry around a few samples. Yeah. I figured I'd give just a very.
I won't
brief-
point out who they
Yeah.
were. Her name's Linda.
I will say that PowerPoint is posted on the committee website if anyone wants to go through it and ask questions about that. But start just with a brief history of the evolution of cannabis policy in Vermont. 2004, the legislature legalized medical cannabis. It was very much just a patient caregiver model, no kind of brick and mortar sales happening. 2018, Vermont became the first state to legalize cannabis through the legislature. There was a just kind of home grow possession situation, no legal sales. And then 2020, the legislature passed Act 164, which created the board and authorized the tax and regulated market. Vermont is somewhat unique in that most of the states that came before us certainly have a binding ballot initiative process. We don't have that here. So the decision to do tax and regulate or legalize cannabis was done at the legislative level without the backstop of the kind of voters demanding it. So that also gave you tremendous flexibility over the shape of the market, because a lot of those ballot initiatives kind of describe what the basic framework is going to look like. You guys did that on your own over the course of, almost 10 years of debate. So what you did is you created the Cannabis Control Board. It's an independent executive branch agency, 3 members. They're appointed by the governor for 3-year terms. We can be reappointed up to 2 times. You're looking at the inaugural appointees. We've been here since April 2021. The board itself, the agency has now 26 positions that are spread over 4 divisions. It's operations, compliance, licensing, and the medical program. We're in the process of building a quality assurance lab for the state, very similar to the ag lab over at the Vale. Historically, jurisdiction over cannabis was a judiciary issue. That's because there's criminal penalties associated with it. But once it became legalized for tax and regulate, it moved over to Senate Economic Development. However, that committee for the past 5 years has deferred to this committee on issues related to agriculture, largely kind of on the cultivation side. And then just Senate Health and Welfare has the medical program, and GovOps usually deals with municipal issues. And of course, fees are at the Finance Committee. So this market is unique in many ways. Vermont, in most industries, can't compete on volume. Our competitive advantage is in kind of value-added craft products, and that is very true in the cannabis industry as well. We built some provisions to make sure that would be true here, that it wouldn't that the industry wouldn't be handed over to just a few large multi-state corporations. So one of the things you did, you wrote into the intent section, which it's one of the few times you mentioned what your intent was, but it's the intent of the General Assembly to shift the illicit market into a regulated market, and to kind of promote cultivation by small cultivators. And you gave us some tools to do that. The other kind of major thing you did, which makes this market largely unattractive to these larger operators, is you created a 1 license per entity rule. So there is no franchising in this industry. You can't kind of stack cultivation facilities all around the state or have multiple retail licenses. So that's very unique to Vermont. So what does the market look like? We have 601 licensees amongst the 7 license types. The vast majority of those are cultivators. I think it's 396 or right around there. And then the vast majority of those cultivators, 75%, are tier 1 small cultivators operating in something probably the size of this room. And that to me represents a shift from the legacy market to the legal market. Those are the people that were growing in their garages, or their spare bedrooms, or their basements, and now they're licensed and they're operating. They're the kind of backbone of this industry. We have over 4,000 unique registered products. The Cannabis Board registers all products. We put our eyes on them before they ever hit the shelves, make sure that they're properly tested, packaged, labeled, contain all the kind of appropriate warnings. It's mostly kind of unique strains of flower, but we also have kind of all of the other products that exist in other markets, the topicals, tinctures, vape cartridges, and edibles.
Are you also regulating hemp as well under your purview?
No, the Agency of Agriculture gave that program back to the USDA. We regulate hemp manufacturers that kind of are making intoxicating hemp products, hemp products, and I got a few just words about that.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Or turning something that's grown as hemp into like a CBD product.
Right.
So not necessarily just intoxicating products, but those products that are, used as topicals for CBD or, in certain other ingestibles that you might find beneficial to use.
So this market has been growing precipitously in the last 2.5 years. FY23, well, I should say JFO just updated their revenue forecast, which is 2 days ago. So that's, you can go to the JFO website to see those numbers. But FY23, which is the first year, partial year that we had taxable sales, brought in, we had 47.9 million in taxable sales. FY24, that number jumped to just shy of 125 million. There is a 14% excise tax on cannabis sales. So FY23, that was 6.7 million. FY24, 17.4 million. And I should mention that the 30% of that excise tax is dedicated to prevention programming in the state. The other 70% goes to the general fund. There's also sales tax. So FY23, just shy of 3 million. FY24, 7.5 million. Those numbers are projected to grow by JFO. They're projecting a 20% increase for FY25, and then an additional 8% increase to the overall size of the market in 26, and then an additional 4% in 27.
Where's your growth coming from?
I think the diversity of products, obviously one of the things, the reason why our numbers are so much higher than the original JFO projections are because we were able to roll out licenses a lot faster than they thought we would be able to. So, you have more retail stores around, you have more products in the market, you're capturing more of the illicit market. As prices decrease, you're also capturing more of the people that would formerly use the illicit market. And then, one thing that I wanted to mention next actually is our market ebbs and flows with the kind of tourism trends that we see. Very similar to other industries. But, we have dips, low points throughout the year, and November stick season and April mud season. We see just when we have kind of these once in a lifetime solar eclipse, we saw a huge bump in sales that kind of surrounding that event. And then on the downside, when we had all this kind of flooding that was splashed all over the New York Times and tourism decreased as a result, we saw sales, dip as well.
Can I add to that? The other would be that we have cultivators who are cultivating for a year or two while they're developing product. So that product is not hitting the shelf for maybe a year while they're developing what they want to put out to the community.
Senator Major.
New Hampshire is mulling over whether they're going to legalize, and we're in Vermont at the time being is benefiting from New Hampshire not having legalized. Once that happens, how much of a decrease are you projecting?
Yeah, another really great point. Border state consumers were all built into both our economic model at the CCB as well as the JFO model. And when we first started, New York had legalized, but they hadn't rolled out any licenses, and they were very slow to roll out the retail licenses. Now they have over 250 spread out throughout the state, including a lot right along our border. And so we are seeing those border consumers that were living in New York, traveling to Vermont to purchase, now just kind of staying home and purchasing more locally. Very true of New Hampshire as well. My reading of the tea leaves is that New Hampshire is not going to do it anytime soon. They got very close with a bill that the former governor said that he would sign. And then the new governor came in and said, I'm just not doing this. Sorry. You had your chance with the last administration.
If I may, as Pepper alluded to, we were seated in April of 2021. One of the first things that we did was get a consultant on retainer to do a market analysis, supply demand model to kind of understand how much supply we needed to meet demand, and tourism is a heavy part of that. But if you think about when we were seeded and when the most recent data was available, it was pre-COVID tourism data. So it's really interesting to kind of see how tourism data lines up post 2020 versus 2016 to 2020. And one of the things that we're looking to do this spring, and we're almost there, is have a consultant under contract to help us forecast not just tourism specific data, because that's the purview of a different agency, but how tourism data, as more states come online, as federal legalization happens. And Pepper will speak a little bit more to this, but how can we forecast out to make sure that if those things do happen, how can we make sure that the most vulnerable parts of our supply chain are not completely taken from the knees down?
One other, obviously the state oversees, and I think more and more municipalities want to get in on the money, are we working with municipalities, local option taxes and things of that nature, or how is that happening, and how are you as a board counseling those municipalities?
Yeah, great question as well, because
Thank you. I appreciate
No,
it.
this is the last bone of contention between the House and the Senate's position on Act 164 was how are we gonna deal with the municipalities and what their interests are. The Senate really wanted a revenue share, give 1 or 2% of the cannabis excise tax to any municipality that's hosting a cannabis establishment, whether it's retail or else otherwise. That was part of the governor's 2018 kind of final recommendations from his Marijuana Advisory Commission as well. Try and have some unity with the local municipalities so that they don't have to rely on a local option tax, because they can do a local option tax, but they can't apply it just to cannabis sales. So you can have a general local option tax, which of course a lot of local businesses don't want, that would apply to cannabis, but there's no cannabis specific local option. The only money that the municipalities get from this, besides any sort of kind of secondary revenue from more businesses, is they have a $100 fee that they assess for every application that they review. And so we collect $100 and remit it to the towns for all those 601 licensees. So not much.
Well, just in terms of the second part of your question, we started in 2021 with a knowledge-based survey of all the municipalities in partnership with the LCT, and then did a roundtable discussion about, what do you know, what do we need to get on the same page about, those types of things. And then since then, we've participated quite a bit in their lunch and learns they do for municipalities. We did a roundtable at their town fair, I think that was last year. And then as part of the outdoor siting report, we did another sort of knowledge base and inquiry survey, and then did a roundtable with that. So we work pretty closely with the LCT and municipalities. And then to add to that, municipalities who would like to can set up a local control commission. And so when that happens, we communicate with that local control commission before we license someone at the state level.
Thank you.
James, the local option tax, in statute right now, it's not allowed. Have any municipalities tried to change their charter to allow it and get the legislature to approve it for just specifically cannabis products?
I do not know the answer to that. I'm sorry.
I feel like we've heard of the intention there, but I don't know if it's a great idea as we're having a conversation in these roundtables. Has that been acted on?
Yeah, we can go into whether it would be approved by the legislature. Sure. A whole other story, but
yeah. I mean, it might be an issue worth revisiting. I know that at the time there was kind of like, well, really like having these specialty taxes everywhere, these kind of boutique taxes that get shared for various ways was kind of not something that the House wanted to do, but a lot of the kind of people that made those decisions have moved on. So, try and think about the things that may impact the market, the overall vibrancy of the market. Certainly we talked about border consumers and tourism just having an impact on this market. One thing that has kind of cropped up since 2018 is intoxicating hemp products. Just for a little bit of context, I promise I'll try not to bore you with this, but the 2018 Farm Bill created a legal distinction between marijuana, controlled one marijuana, and hemp. And it's the same plant. It's just, you know, hemp has low THC, marijuana or cannabis has high THC. So because of the definition that they use, they really unleashed kind of a Pandora's box on intoxicating hemp-derived products. Because you can harvest all the hemp you want and it's got THC in it and it's just a low amount. You can take all that THC out and infuse it into products. And because the source material is hemp, the legal theory is that the products are legal. And that means they can be shipped through the mail, they can be sold online, they can be sold to, you know, teenagers. None of the state cannabis regulations theoretically apply to those products because of kind of the source material that was hemp. So the legislature really kind of started to understand this issue and try to get ahead of it. In 2022, you gave the Cannabis Board the authority over all cannabinoids, including the hemp-derived synthetic cannabinoids.
Years into the adult use market for the medical program to be prioritized as compared to the adult use market with financial and tax incentives and gains for the state. Knowing this expected closure would be detrimental.
Sorry about that. So you gave us authority over all kind of synthetic cannabinoids, hemp-derived cannabinoids, and then we kind of adopted a rule to really limit to kind of ban the synthetic ones. This is like when you take CBD and apply some kind of, you know, chemical processes to it and create synthetic delta-9 THC or delta-8 THC. So we banned those, and then we created a definition of an intoxicating hemp-derived product, and we said, you know, if you're above certain thresholds of THC, then all of the cannabis regulations apply, and it can only be sold in adult use stores. You know, you have to get a license, you have to go through the same testing protocols as any other kind of cannabis regulator or cannabis licensee. And if you're below those thresholds, then it's a non-intoxicating product, and you can kind of treat it like a food, drug, cosmetic deck product, like an herbal supplement or whatever else, dietary supplement. But this is a major industry, and it's very hard to stop the online sales. You know, even with all the laws and rules and regulations we can put in place, you know, it's very hard to stay on top of this. The hemp industry is a $28 billion annual industry. They've got lobbyists, they've got lawyers. They don't like when states try and kind of impede their products from entering, you know, their markets. It's one of those things where unless we kind of really stay vigilant over those products, they pose an existential threat to the kind of regulated cannabis market. And by the way, those hemp industry, like, I think it's important to note that cannabis businesses really have a lot of the kind of cards stacked against them. You know, they don't get to write off their business expenses on their federal tax returns. They don't have access to bank loans. They don't have access to lines of credit. They don't have bankruptcy protection or any kind of support from the USDA or the Small Business Administration. And oftentimes we see that landlords will charge cannabis businesses a premium, and that insurance companies, there are no admitted insurers for cannabis businesses. It's all these surplus line insurers. They can charge essentially whatever they want. They're not regulated insurance companies, and they can kind of exclude things in the fine print. And none of that applies to if you're an intoxicating hemp producer. So we do have some legislative asks this year, but they're mostly around how to kind of regulate the industry more efficiently. So I just want to make a plug here that, you know, the Cannabis Board is not an advocacy organization. Our job, the way I see it, is to roll out this marketplace the way you want it to look. And so
as you go into your ask, if you could, and maybe you're going to, and I apologize, but tell us what's worked and what hasn't worked as far as in the community rollouts and where the rubs are or where the rubs aren't, or maybe conceptions or misconceptions as far as, you know, how it works for communities going out there. Because that's ultimately who we're going to be responsible for as we decide anything.
Right. Yeah. I mean, frankly, I think rolled out a little bit better than people expected. You know, I know that a lot of people are struggling. I mean, there is one of the biggest problems that we have is that we're an uncapped licensing system. That's very different than most states. Most states say, well, we want to grow 1 million square feet of canopy this year. So we're going to have, 100,000 square feet operations. And we're going to give those licenses out in the lottery. And that's it for this year. We're going to have 20 retail stores and that's it. And we're going to, that's kind of an inequitable way to distribute those licenses. And Vermont really wanted to kind of shift, have low barriers to entry, keep this market small and craft. So the uncapped licensing system is beneficial to industry players, but the downside is, we have these seasonal oversupplies every year, post-harvest, everyone's harvesting at the same time. That puts pressure on the product manufacturers, it puts pressure on the testing facilities that we have, and it makes the price of cannabis drop.
Even with the ability to grow indoors, you're still running into that saturated market come fall?
So yes, and I mentioned we have, right around 400 cultivators. 60% of those are outdoor. We thought, just given the climate and the challenges of growing outdoor, our consultants kind of looked at Alaska and Massachusetts and some other states with similar climates and thought the majority of this is going to be indoor. They thought it was going to be 80% indoor, but we see that the trend is really a preference for outdoor cultivation.
Back to your, to the startup cost that you talked about for insurance and all that, the startup cost for an indoor facility is much higher than an outdoor facility, so I think that has something to do with that.
Yeah, and if I may, if we think about outdoor and the low barriers to entry, I think the next hurdle, both for us as regulators, but also for the community, and as you talk to cultivators and advocacy groups, I think something that you're going to hear is, how do we stay viable? And I'm sure as you talk to ag-oriented businesses, ag businesses, value-added businesses, not just in the cannabis space, but across the state of Vermont, that's a question that everybody is trying to grapple with. A lot of other businesses in this, orientation have access to business support, have access to technical support, have access to bank loans, have access to NRCS through USDA. This industry does not have any of that. And so, I used to work at the Agency of Agriculture. I used to work in ag development. And one of the greatest things was being able to help folks who are really good at growing something or producing something and helping them figure out how to create a business model that's workable for them. And that's not something that we currently have. We've been in conversations with the Working Lands Enterprise Board, with the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, the Land Access and Opportunity Board, Farm and Forest Viability. There's so much federal dollar entanglement with a lot of these organizations that it's really challenging to get them comfortable to help support an industry that is federally illegal. So the numbers and the revenue projections are beating outpacing what we anticipated, but that doesn't tell the full picture of the health of the market. And we built this on small mom and pop operators. If they crumble, if they're not able to successfully tell their story moving forward, then market consolidation happens. And that's when the big players really are able to sink their claws into a market and take it away. Vermont is a craft-oriented, state. We can't compete on volume, we can compete on quality. And that's how so many products that come from Vermont are known regionally and nationally. They have that kind of support, whether it's from the federal government or from states, to kind of incubate and allow them to grow at a rate that's successful. Without that kind of support, I think it's one of the things that you might hear moving forward, that the future of the market might be a little bit less certain moving forward.
A couple questions. So obviously, until the federal side gets where it's acceptable, you're not going to see any of these loans. So as a business owner, you notice going into this. So it's like, I'm not going to have any support. So whereas, now you're asking maybe the state to do it, still it's illegal federally. And I understand, business owner, as you do, that it's probably just not going to happen. It's going to be very hard for the state to do it. Second question though is, are there states out there that have cannabis sales that the state does aid in their businesses?
So Vermont's market looks vastly different than just about any other market around the country. Typically, what a state looks to do is replace the illicit market with big businesses that are well-financed from private capital, that have an army of attorneys and accountants to really aid in whatever the state tells them that they need to do. They have that comfortability to kind of take loss after loss after loss and hold on until it might become more palatable at the federal level, or things kind of ease up at the state level. We have not looked to replace the illicit market. We've looked to empower the illicit market to kind of come into the regulatory market. And to your first point, it's well taken. Like, we're in a capitalistic society, we're in a competitive market. Folks are going to fail. But I think one of the challenges there is, there's a lot of really good people that are trying to grow this, and they're really good at it. They need support just like a forest operator that's looking to kind of buy a new piece of machinery, or a dairy operator who's failing because they don't have the proper support in a highly competitive market.
But is there other states that support cannabis business?
Yes, so
Growers.
Massachusetts, for example, has, for a set of their licenses, has a robust program where there's business education, there is loans that go with it, grants that go with it. That's the first one that comes to mind, but there are others.
Could you get us some data on that? Because that, what you're asking would help us.
We've produced a couple of reports, maybe we're gonna talk about this next, but we've produced a couple of reports over the summer at your request that I think will get at some of that.
I just wanted to impress upon how we're a much more craft-oriented market than any other state, and there are other state programs that help more in the social equity context and kind of empowering a lot of folks that may have been a victim of the war on drugs, so to speak, moving forward. But from the kind of context of small business support, I think we're trying to be a leader there.
So we're getting into this a little bit, where I kind of wanted it to go, because as we formed this committee and what we were going to look at going forward, it was always to put political beliefs besides and to help agriculture. And whether people believe or whether they don't believe, we have people in this business within the state that is legal. I'm looking for the struggles of what the shopkeepers are seeing as far as going, and we're getting there. We're getting into some of where it is, but what else? What are some of the things that legislation could help change, or what should we know about some of the struggles of these people who are choosing to make this their business?
Well, yeah, that is the fundamental heart of the problem here, because unlike tobacco or alcohol or pharma, there is the intoxicating hemp market running right alongside this that has no regulation, no advertising restrictions. And then there's also the illicit market, no regulation, can operate just at much cheaper costs. So our goal always at the board is to really try and cut away all the regulation that's not directly related to public health and public safety. But any chance that we can to kind of cut the kind of regulation and red tape that surrounds the cannabis business, just recognizing that people are providing products that people that are going to consume anyway because of our advertising laws. We're not trying to encourage new consumers. We're trying to shift the behavior of the existing consumers towards a better product.
But I think you're going to get that shift regardless as you run a better business and you put less barriers on there. I think you're going to get people that say, you know what, I don't want to go, and I think especially people who might have something to lose, like everybody does, but some people either loss of reputation or whatever by buying something that's illegal versus saying, you know what, it's just right there. I'm going to go in there and just buy from there, and then I'm protected in that way. So I think you're going to have that increase in usage by people wanting to follow the rules, who probably wouldn't be your stereotype typical cannabis user. But they want to follow the rules. They want to go in there, and they don't want to take this chance of having the little baggie piece, as they're stopped for an infraction. So I think you're going to gain that by. So again, whatever we can do again to legally to help these people who are in this business, is what we would hear.
So we did a couple of roundtables with cultivators and retailers and manufacturers this summer, and I'm sure you'll hear from, you know, VGA and other folks more directly what their business concerns are, but it seems like support with building their business, but just business education. We have a lot of folks who are very intelligent and have had other businesses, but not this one, and it's regulated very differently. So, business
on the-
support, understanding, wait, hold on a
Okay,
second. And then I would say, you know, like staffing, is a concern for everyone. We're among the lowest in unemployment in the country, right? And so that means everybody's fighting over the same staff. And then those business loans and things like that to support the long-term growth of their business, are some of the things that at least I think we heard.
Sure, I just wanted to say the flip side of the, I've run other businesses and I want to do this is I talk to people that have never run a business except this in the illicit market. And so now they're subjecting themselves, you know, whether they should be or not, to your point, you know, they're trying to figure out how to do payroll tax. They're trying to figure out all of these steps that business and technical service providers around the state provide to anybody with a bright idea, unless it's cannabis, right? So we're seeing all ends of the spectrum, and we're trying to figure out ways that we can look to provide, the knowledge that this is a serious issue, and that, you know, we hope that we can, you know, all work together to find some pathways to keep these businesses viable moving forward.
So, and then I would just add the border state competition that we talked about earlier, is another issue. And then positioning themselves for whenever it comes, we don't really know, but at some point there will either be interstate commerce probably, or federal legalization, and positioning themselves so that they're not really swallowed up by these other much larger businesses in other states that are far more well-resourced and have been building sort of a national network. It's the other concern that I hear often.
We're got 10 minutes and you've got some asks, so we'll let you get to that and to make sure that we can, you know, you can get out what you'd like to get out.
Great. Yes, thank you for that. I think, you know, we generally don't get in the business of telling the legislature how to spend its money. But sometimes we are asked.
That's your project.
Yes. Sometimes we're asked. Last year we were asked to write a report. It's posted on your website now, to the General Assembly regarding what percentage of the excise tax should be earmarked for business support for the cannabis industry. And, you know, with that, I think it's implicit that, and what should that money be used for? And so we met with a number of the people in this room and a number of the people around the state to kind of come up with a catalog of what business supports are offered to other agricultural businesses, other industries that aren't offered to cannabis because of its federal status. And so that report is on your website now under my name. It's the 7BSA report. And that details the kind of technical assistance support that we think should go to this industry. I should say that the legislature recognized this as a kind of a gap in the industry, a need in this industry, this need for technical assistance and, you know, maybe some grants, loans. You guys created what's called the Cannabis Business Development Fund. And we put so far to date over the past 3 years, $500,000 annually into it. So for a total of 1.5 million. And the request from the report, the question asked of the Cannabis Board in the report is, should that be an annual revenue stream? So you don't have to come back every year and just ask for that to be replenished. And if it was going to be annual, how much should go into it? And so after kind of the stakeholder meetings that we did, we said $1 million, but you should also expand the scope of it so that it can apply to all social equity applicants, the kind of equity applicants, but also all of the tier 1 outdoor cultivators who really face unique challenges in this industry. And then we kind of lay out what that $1 million, a kind of menu of what that $1 million might support, but it's really just grants, you know, half of it for grants essentially. And then half of it to create a network of advisors, very, very similar to what the blanking on the name.
Sustainable Jobs Fund.
Yeah,
Sustainable Jobs Fund, that's
Yeah.
a structure.
yeah, they have kind of a coordinator that, kind of does intake with a prospective business. They kind of do some business planning, identify needs of that business, including needs that that business owner might not even have thought of. And then they have a network of advisors that they match make with to kind of make sure that people get the support they need at whatever stage of their operation they're in, whether it's kind of the startup or growth. And so kind of mirror what exists elsewhere, but do it for cannabis. That fund, by the way, is run out of the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, not through us. So
Now, is that a suggestion or that's an ask? What, to bump that up to the $1 million? Because my point of what I want to make is if it's something that you want to get to, how are you going to get that to us? Is it going to be in the governor's proposal or anything? How are you going to get the ask to that? Are you looking for us to write a bill to get it to that point, or how will that money get?
well, it was a request of the Senate Economic Development Committee,
Okay.
that report. So, I mean, but I think considering expanding the scope of the fund to include all outdoor cultivators, I think that is something that would need the support of this committee. I think that committee will turn to you and say, is that a good use of this money? And is $1 million the right amount? And so, what I would hope this committee would do is kind of analyze what we're asking for, and think, okay, is this a good use of very limited state resources? You know, I think because we're doing it for every other industry except cannabis, I think it makes sense to do it for cannabis as well. But, again, I know the pressures that everyone is under. And then the other piece of legislation that this committee took some lead on last year was around outdoor siting of cannabis cultivation. And you asked us to write a report around that, which we also have posted to your website.
Okay.
I'll kind of leave it to Julie. Julie took the lead on that report, so maybe you can just briefly just give the kind of executive summary.
So that report really asked, for an inquiry about three things, really: outdoor siting and its impact, both from the municipality perspective and the outdoor cultivators perspective, about local control, and then the last item was about advertising. And we did a summer-long inquiry. We looked at mapping to see so just to back up a little bit, Act 166 added some new requirements for outdoor siting, with the ability for municipalities to set cultivation districts, and then also some setbacks within a cultivation district, outside a cultivation district, and when there's no zoning. So we looked at where our cultivators are, how they would be impacted by that. We think that based on preliminary mapping, that there are at least 11 that'll be specifically impacted by that. There's a lot in that report that explains what the shortcomings of that are and what some of the other impacts could be. But I'd be happy to come back and go through with all of the report and all of the results around what we found on outdoor siting for you.
I think that might be warranted.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Yeah, and I'll just, if I could bring up, I think Julie already is anticipating my question. I had a constituent who is absolutely upset about being next to a cultivator who originally only had an indoor permit, then was granted an outdoor permit as well. She has medical issues with breathing, et cetera, and the smell is driving her crazy, to be fair. Her first name is Lynn. I know she's communicated with you, Julie, directly. I haven't read the report. Is there any recommendation about increasing buffer zones around this? I don't know what the answer is. As Senator Heffernan mentioned earlier when we were talking about it, it's not unlike living next to a farm and not being particularly enamored with during certain parts of the year, the fertilizing that's going on. The difference is, again, federally it's illegal. So her point is it's not the same as living next to a farm. I don't know what we can do about it, but I wanted to at least bring it up. And I know Pepper and I talked over the summer too, so.
I mean, I empathize. I grew up downwind of Shadowcross Farm, right? Large chicken farm.
Hey.
A lot of our outdoor gym classes were marked by that smell. So I completely empathize with that, right? And you're right, it isn't all that different necessarily in the smell or how that travels. But yes, to shortly answer your question, yes, rebuttable presumption of nuisance is part of that report, and we dive pretty deeply, and it provides some other studies around how smell is measured and things like that. And in particular, thinking about the difference between in cannabis is the growing of cannabis is regulated by the state of Vermont, but the growing of hemp is regulated by the USDA.
Right.
And it is ultimately the same plant and can produce ultimately the same smell at ultimately the same time. So if that person were to start growing hemp, it would be the USDA's jurisdiction. So I think that's something that we have to think about as we talk about the rebuttable presumption.
Okay.
And just to add to that, I think one of the big challenges here is that, you know, we can talk about buffer zones, we can talk about siting, but a lot of it really wouldn't address a lot of those types of specific issues anyways. And when we look at a lot of the authorizing legislation and where folks can fundamentally grow this, it does create scenarios like your constituent is facing. I grew up on a farm, I live next to a farm right now. You know, we're in this kind of chicken or the egg thing right now where you're used to, the whole rebuttable presumption falls on the, are you coming to the nuisance or not? And this is the inverse of that, because the nuisance arguably, if that's what you want to call it, is something that's new. And it's an industry that doesn't have that kind of historical value yet, to kind of, you know, go strictly to that. And I think some of the report kind of really digs into how we can kind of continue to provide a rebuttable presumption for cannabis, but to consider some of the problems that your constituent is facing.
Thank you. Got a couple minutes left. What? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, if you have something more important, I was just gonna ask a question on smell, because like burnt coffee, when they roast coffee, it used to happen in Bristol, they moved to Middlebury, and that was an unusual smell that wasn't there, and there was nothing anybody could do about it. So unfortunately, I don't think right now, because there is no laws on it, and that's gonna open Pandora's box. Is that basically the advice you had to tell her, or?
I had a long conversation with her, several actually, and the issue there, and she fully acknowledges it, that no matter how big that buffer zone is going to be, the smell is going to reach her. I mean, I think she says her house is over 200 feet away from the grow facility, so you know, so really, to me, you know, she has a legal remedy, potentially, this kind of nuisance, and because she was living there before it was a cannabis cultivation, she probably, I know I hate to say that because it's like, oh, well, let's just hire a bunch of attorneys and fight this for years. You know, these are very, you know, costly things to suggest, but I think it does kind of highlight an area where there is no great solution here. You know, no amount of buffer is going to stop this odor from kind of drifting over to her house.
Yeah, understood. Yeah. And I don't know that she was actually asking for the license to be revoked.
Right.
She said when it was indoors, it did reach her, but it was nowhere to the level or degree that when it began to grow outside. So I didn't have an answer for her. I probably still don't have an answer for her, but as Julie said, I'm sympathetic because I have asthma on occasion, and you know,
It's a very potent smell. My brother did hemp for.
Yeah. I mean, there's no question it smells.
And one of those studies that I provided talks about, and it measures smell, but then it talks about, here's the measurement on a meter that has no feelings, right? And then here's how, you know, some people have allergies to perfume or the coffee smell or whatever it is. So it's very real for the person who's experiencing it. But one of the interesting things about that study was it measured, I think it was 1,000 square feet of indoor cannabis and compared it to other community smells. And it was like equal to 2 kilograms of garbage and then 6 chickens, or it's in there, but you know, it doesn't register on a machine the same way it registers with a human. So it's tough. It's a tough conversation.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
And we're wrapping up. Anything else that you'd like to add to us?
No, other than, you know, I think these 2 reports that I sent really do implicate this committee's jurisdiction over cannabis. So if you ever do want to come back and walk through those, happy
We
to.
gotta ask Linda to get the reports to us, and when we have them on our devices as well. But let us get through that, and
then
feel free to reach out as well.
Yeah, that, I really appreciate it. And the only other suggestion I have, is just to, we're gonna start our bill in the House, GovOps, and then it'll probably get sent over and referred to economic development, but, any coordination you can have with the chair of that committee to kind of help.
Well, that's why we asked,
Yeah,
that's why
yeah.
we asked where it was going, how it was,
Yeah.
so we would be aware of it.
Yeah.
Okay,
Great.
sounds good. Committee, only
Thank you.
take 5 minutes, and I apologize to the group here. We just gotta take 5 minutes. We'll give you your time on